Oh, okay. So are we live? Yeah. Okay. So I'm here today with Dorothea Lasky, and so she's going to be doing a reading today and then a craft talk afterwards. And so Dorothea Lasky is the author of
Are we
five.
live?
Yeah, I think. Um, Dorothea Lasky is the author of five full-length collections of poetry and one book of prose. She's the author of Animal, Rome, Milk, Thunderbird, Black Life, and AWE, all out from Wave Books. She's the co-writer of Astro Poets, Your Guides to the Zodiac, and she has two monthly columns, Horoscope and Advice, at Magazine with the poet Alex Dimitriov. She has also written several chapbooks, including Snakes and Poetry is Not a Project. Her writing has appeared in Poetry, The New Yorker, The Paris Review, The Atlantic, and Boston Review, among other places. She's the co-editor of Open the Door, How to Excite Young People About Poetry. Her humor and sense for tragedy are able to lend readers an intimate space. I'm so excited to have her here. Without further ado, I give you Dorothea Lasky.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you. And thank you, yes, for inviting me, Dana J. I'm so happy to be here with you. And hello, everyone out there. So I'm going to be reading some poems, and I'm going to read some older poems first and then some newer poems. And then maybe read some of a book of lectures that came out last year. And then maybe we'll have a conversation. So I hope that sounds good. And the first poem I'm going to read is in a book called Milk. And it's called Do You Want to Dip the Rat? And hopefully on this dreary day in New York, there are a lot of rats that are, going to be happy when they hear this love poem to them. Do you want to dip the rat completely in oil? Do you want to dip the rat before we eat it, eat it? Do you want to dip the rat completely in oil before we eat it? Tender, tender meat like pork shoulder, 100 traps set, 80 hanging in a row to be broiled. With you, I'd take it raw, tiny pink feet glistening with oil, legs and feet glistening with oil, matted fur and face weighted down with oil. Everything in oil, but the teeth are shiny clean. Know what I really want to know before you open that mouth again. Should we completely dip the rat in oil before we eat it, eat it? Should we completely dip the rat in oil before we eat it? The miscarriage. The doctor says it's an empty room in there, and it is. A pale sack with no visitors. I have made it and surrounded it with my skin to invite the baby in, but he did not enter and dissolved himself into the sea so many moons ago. I wait to see will the giant bean be in there another day. The women of the world say work harder. The men in the world say work harder. I work and work, but I am an empty sack until I bleed the food all over the floor. Then I am once again with everything, until the gods say, you've done well, good sir, you may die now. And the people who were asking me for favors all along knock on the coffin door, but I am gone, gone. And gonna read a couple poems from a book called Rome. And the first one is called Why Poetry Can Be Hard for Most People. And by most people, I obviously mean people that are not, viewing this webinar. I almost called this a podcast, video podcast. I'm not sure what to call this, but so everyone else. Why poetry can be hard for most people. Because speaking to the dead is not something you want to do when you have other things to do in your day, like take out the trash or use the vacuum in the edge between the stove and the cupboard. Because the rat is everywhere crawling around, or more so walking, and it doesn't even notice you. It has its own intentions and is searching for that perfect bag of potato chips like you once were. Because life is no more important than eating or fucking or talking someone into fucking or talking someone into something or sleeping calmly and soundly. And all you can hope for are the people who put that calm in you or let you go into it with dignity, because poetry reminds you that there is no dignity in living. You just muddle through, and for what? Jack, Jack, you wrote to him, you wrote to all of us. I wasn't even born. You wrote to me a ball of red and green shifting sparks in my parents' eye. You wrote to me and I just listened. I listened, I tell you, and I came back. No, poetry is hard for most people because of sound. Georg Trakl in the Green Sun. Georg Trakl in the sun, I am in love with you. I want you to come back to this earth so that we can be lovers. I will wash your hallucinatory sheets with bleach and give birth to your Austrian kin. It took a while, now I am me. You were always you. Come back to this earth. I will wash you in a bath of violet milk. I will take all of your cares away. I will be your mother, father. I will be your sister, little bunny. I will birth you in the ocean, and when your head disconnects from your body, I will scoop up the black water until I find it and put it in a pail of blue and sail the ocean back to land, to put your eyelids in a jar, a tiny capsule, to take with me everything. Yes, I will eat. I will swallow your eyelashes. And if you don't think I'm serious, and if you don't think I'm serious this time, poetry, I am. And now I'm going to read some new poems from a book that's called The Green Lake. And this book is seeming to be a lot about sadly our kind of climate, catastrophe that's been happening, and we hope won't continue to happen, or we'll have some control over it. But I know it's hard, like this book is about, but I guess that's sort of what a lot of things in the book tend to be about, and just the kind of hopeful possibilities of nature. So I'll just read some poems from it. And yes, Roses from the Moon. Roses on the moon are tiny, made of rocks in infinite depth. They die because there is no drinking. They die a very quick death. The moon can be so swift. It's a party on a wayward planet. In outer space, everything dies, except magnetism. Creativity is the answer to the question of hate. No matter what they do, choose creativity as a lifestyle despite the horror. Yeah, I'm advocating for a no-holds-barred, orgiastic connection with the divine, through a belief that time and space are part of the whole construct that makes us unhappy. And while inviting in past and living principles of what you once were and what you will be, because what you are now is an illusion. And as soon as you know that, you will rise up in personal, private, and public ecstasy, an endless purple flower in the midst of a perpetual purple rain. I'm saying hate has no place for the house you will continue to make, with friends and lovers who, in spite of the enemy, show you that only love really is real. So do not go into the showers and stalls, my ancestors and children. Make the forest haunted with the Mars yellow lights you have strung up on the inside. Make the heart your place of worship. Be free. The Green Lake. What work will you leave behind? I asked the tailor who has sewed the button upon my shoe. I can walk again. Yesterday, everything felt so hopeless. Now I have the energy to sit in the sun. All of the damned, seething baths. Now I am finally on my own. When I go places, I call her and unload my fashionable happenstance. I used to stop in the street and pick up an acorn. There were so many things I used to do. In the middle of the fire, I went and thought to mention it to the ghost. I have already burned, it said. Its face was like my father's, but was different. What work will you leave behind? I asked myself while in the rain. Oh, this and that, it answered me. and handed me the stars, then the moon. The endless garden. Everything will be a tree in the afterlife, and after we have ruined this one, with an endless party of oil and money, the spirits will make us flowering acres to enjoy the limitless fruit. When you spot me there, you might take down a golden peach and say, "Eat, eat, my beloved." Oh, but you were never my friend, and I'll snatch your fruit from you. Ever since the day that we first met, I've been the snake in the endless garden, waiting for your stupid kindness, your big dumb hand to sever. Winter. Maybe I was born weeping, a sort of loss of faith in the utter blanketing darkness. I muttered it until I meant it. I mustered, poetry will save us all. The orange plants magnified, everyone surrounded by endless fires and disease. Maybe I was born kneeling atop the orange mountain, no rebirth in sight. There were times I knew I had been there before, a locket with your initial around my arm. She should have stayed alive, I told the end a little quietly. The frigid sun, it said nothing. You know they tried, but they couldn't stop me. I waited until they forgot about me, and then I ran. And this poem is called Love is Like a Butterfly, with homage to Dolly Parton, of course. Love is like a butterfly. When you're around, it's like the smallest lilacs are in bloom forever. Between us, I feel the tiniest tender flowers, the smallest little lilacs. Between us, like many glowing eggs that we gently volley and roll back and forth between us as a song. Despite the world and all its cruelty, we dare not break them. We use every ounce to give them care. Despite it all, my mad heart, small and insidious, your heart and all its madness, an aquarium with the tiniest fish, always sweet and green forever. Small and insidious, that is what they will say of our love. People write poems about all of their fake love. Real love is a tiny flower. We barely touch between us. Real love is tenderness. Spring. Never blame a rat for being a rat. Never blame a cloud for being a cloud. Never blame a person for being who they are, which in my case is short and stocky and quite ill. Never blame a friend for not being a friend. Never blame her for stabbing you in the back. It was you that could have stopped it after all. Never blame the sun for being the sun, or the moon for, being itself. Never blame a face for being a face, or the stars for being true to the sky. When things start, they start. Never stop them from being so. Never blame an aquarium from housing fish, or a lock from keeping you in. Never blame the color blue from being very blue. Never blame the rat when he bites you on your back. He's just doing what he's supposed to do. His fanged teeth, they're hanging down. The way you miss them, the way you miss the sea. All these pretty flowers drugged in the water, creative sunrises, the very fact of their undertaking, that there is a spirit to things. You know it is everywhere, all this beauty, the living art, the self, the roses, and all. Red lips. You burned everything we were up in a house fire. I caught you running from the smoke, murmuring about your pillbox. Silly silver fox, burning the books of my enemies. Now I am going backwards in time, somehow turning all of that anger into a poem. You as the figure to my side in the elevator, when I knew this wasn't all a joke. A figure to my right on the seascape, trying to figure out what I mean. Baby, when they ask you what you mean, say poetry. A real poet, you wouldn't care less what they say. So say poetry. If you were a real thing, you'd write your own poems and say nothing. Me, I answer no letters. I answer to no one. Mother witch, another home, another mother. Red lips in the shade of number one. Red coven filled with your blood. And when they ask you about you, I dare you, say me. Now I am going backwards in time towards you because I am your sweetheart. Us barreling home on the lake, you in the night with the wind coming in. All those little red windows. One day we will be home again. When they ask you what you mean, say me, the biggest lie imaginable, because life is never over. When they ask you about me, mean it, say poetry. One day soon, I'll come home again. And this is the last poem I'm going to read in this new book, and it's called The Golden Hour. And it's about a ballet that I saw at New York City Ballet, Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto Number 2, with apologies to Tchaikovsky because I probably said that wrong, but and it's called The Golden Hour. At the end of time, it was the golden hour, wherein the golden light the supper was placed in a row. Spiced hams, tiny cherries, the very large pineapple air. Language is a water, or is it a rose? I sat so quietly so that no one would notice me. I still remember the time when we were dancing. All of a sudden the lights dimmed, an arch of arm and walking like we were at war, dim gray curtsies and the icing of gray bones. No one can answer how horrible it was going to get. The clown in his red wetsuit hiding in the corner of the stage. Poverty rage all in every movement, the fallacies of each age and every small and subtle jump. To lift one's arm as one lifts a line, and to cut off movement, as one cuts off the poem entirely, as one cuts off speech entirely. The world itself filling with smog, cleanly moving into balanced lines, reconvening in gray valances, edging out in smoky grace. All the stresses of my lifetime written into as few words as possible. And when all of this is over, I will be so silent. No one will see me anymore or hear me either. I will be so quiet. I will fade and fold with the mistakes of my age. We stopped dancing so long ago, I can hardly remember. Subtle and smoking applause, the clapping of the eternal grave. It was all of this and more, the dancers exiting. I was certain then that you loved me. What did we used to believe in? All of a sudden the lights dimmed. What is this forever? We were in lines together with the lights off. And now I'm going to read, just a little portion of some lectures in this book called Animal that came out last year. And because it's almost Halloween, I thought I'd read some kind of ghostly stuff. And just about one time when I saw a ghost, and so there's probably not enough context, but oh well, hopefully it'll make enough sense. But the sighting of the ghost. The poet John Wieners wrote, I can only say real happiness yields from the world of poems, and its practitioners are secret, sacred vessels to an ancient divinity. As I mentioned before, and obviously you'd have to have read the before, I guess sorry, I'm not great at reading prose yet. But anyway, I think poetry is special because it connects us to the imagination, another world, or perhaps the other world, which is a physical space that poems enact with and encounter. In his 1940 book, The Imaginary, Sartre writes that when a writer creates something, they have visions, and that these visions are made into a very real space in the brain. Sartre's idea seems to me very much in line with what Dickinson writes of in her poem about death. After a great pain, a formal feeling comes, the nerves sit ceremonious like tombs, and the stiff heart questions, was it he that bore, and yesterday or centuries before? The feet mechanical go round a wooden way of ground or air or aught, regardless grown, a quartz contentment like a stone. This is the hour of lead, remembered if outlived, as freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. As Dickinson writes, when a person dies, after pain comes the formal feeling of cold. To let go of the person as a being, to release them into a space where all voices commingle, as freezing persons recollect the snow. To have a vision of a feeling is a type of formality. Perhaps poets are the beings on this earth that can go into the freezing place and bring out the pieces of snow. Something that Bernadette Mayer appropriated for her translation of Catullus number 48, something she describes as a formal field of kissing, of being in love, a place where one kiss is never enough, where one kiss is just never enough snow. I think the formal field is the land of light and ashes, a place of visions, a place, as Jack Spicer wrote about in his lecture, Dictation and a Textbook of Poetry, that the dead speak from and a poet receives radio messages from, a place which might be an outside, an id down in the cortex which you can't reach anyway, galaxies which seem to be sending radio messages to us, with the whole of the galaxy blowing up just to say something to us. In comparing himself rather snarkily to Byron, Keats wrote, he describes what he sees. I describe what I imagine. Mine is the hardest task. I tend to agree with him. When I got to the villa the first year, I couldn't sleep for about 2 weeks. Maybe I slept an hour or two here and there. I couldn't sleep because I felt certain that something was in the room with me. It sounds crazy to say all of this to you, I know, but after a while I started talking to the presence in my room. In words in my imagination, she spoke back. We communicated. She conveyed who she was and that she liked my jewelry and just wanted to hang out sometimes. This made sense. I mean, have you seen my jewelry? Also, I know it's hard to see on Zoom, but also because I would often see my jewelry pop up in odd places after I had locked it away in a drawer or cabinet. She told me that she lived in the 16th century. In my mind, I had the vision of her as a teenager with long blonde hair. I was absolutely certain that this is what she looked like. For fear of seeming crazy, I didn't tell anyone about our communication, but once it happened, I felt free and slept like a baby. A few days later, my student told me that she had something important to tell me. She said that when she was in the workout room the night before, a sort of creepy looking blonde teenager tried to turn off her treadmill, but that when she went to touch the girl's hand and implore the girl to stop, the hand and the girl disappeared into the air. I told my student about my encounter with what was likely the same entity. We both felt better. We shared a belief in another dimension of being, and we had both interacted with the same ghost. There was a comfort in this shared reality, this shared imagination. This is probably the opposite of how one should feel in that situation. Were we both going insane? Did we both have heat stroke? Did we just prove that ghosts exist? Still, it was something special that our brains connected in this way, with this same image. Up until that point, I hadn't actually seen the ghosts. Despite my wanting to believe, I always kind of not believed in ghosts too, and never having seen one made me feel slightly disconnected from them. The morning after my student shared her story with me, I came back to the villa from a trip to town. As I walked to my room in the early morning heat, I saw a teenager about 100 feet from me in the olive grove. The girl had on periwinkle shorts, a particular shade my mother had gotten into in the 80s. In my mind, I can see a stack of periwinkle sweaters piled on her bed now. The girl was not so much wearing shorts as a skirt. She was looking at the leaves of a tree as if she were looking for something. Curious, but partially with the manner of a scientist. I thought she was one of my students, so I looked down. I didn't feel like talking to anyone. A few seconds later, feeling guilty, aren't teachers supposed to always be ready to talk to students? I looked up. The girl was gone. I blinked. There was no way a person couldn't have gotten away so fast. That's odd, I said aloud to myself. Only later that day, when I revisited the memory, did I remember she had gleaming blonde hair. So yes, a little bit of a slight cliffhanger in case you ever want to read it. There's a lot more. I probably should have given you a lot more context, but hopefully it made sense. All true stories, of course. And so I just thought I'd end the reading part before we start talking with a poem called Twin Peaks. I'm sadly just pure instinct in a jean jacket, a guess in a red dress. I only have time for coffee, but do you have time for me? Shadow cousin with the face of my past abuser, cough, cough, and a little whatever. My pussy squirts flowers in the spring, purple hair and all that jazz like a tear. The moon is in Scorpio. I'm in the moon. My baby moon, my baby. I am still, despite it all, milking. Do you want me? Do you want to sip my clear cocoon full of nutrients? Sadly, still only a summitive mountaintop. Do you want to soak it completely in oil before we eat it, glistening the tiny pink feet? Do you want to soak the rat completely in oil before we eat it? Eat it? You know you're such a mess in a red dress. For you, I'd take it raw. Tell me, do you want to soak the rat completely in oil before we eat it? Do you want to soak the rat completely in oil before we eat it? Thank you so much. I can read more or whatever, but it seemed like a good, place to end. All these papers, loose leaf. Can tell there's some stuff in flux. Thank you again. Oh, sorry. I just want to say,
Go on.
no, I just want to say thank you again for listening, especially to the new poems. Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, what's making the new work happen? Is it something new inside of you, or is it the political climate? What's happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just trying to reconcile with everything going on. And I know we were talking about before we started the idea of humor and poetry, and that's always been something that's like important to me. But I've been having finding a very hard time finding anything that funny. Of course, I know everything is funny, and humor is really important not to lose it. But yeah, everything just seems so grave. So I think a lot of the poems are coming out of that, and also just kind of a conflict I'm having in myself about poetry, and what its purpose is. That it's like a long-term conflict I've had, if it's really selfish to write poetry, and but yet it's so important, and poetry always matters no matter what. So I think it's kind of like a little bit of a crisis with the poems. Yeah, that's happening.
So for like poetry being selfish, is it that it feels like an indulgence just for you? You write poetry can save us. Do you believe that?
I know, yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I guess I do. I would say that it will always save us, and it will always save other people. But I guess sometimes I question, yeah, just like what me writing poetry will do, and what that could do, for the world, or like, is it really like the most valuable thing I could contribute? I've long had that dilemma in myself, that and sort of always tried to veer away from, just doing poetry, because I wanted to, yeah, maybe do other things that I felt were less selfish. And so but so that it's like that conflict. At the same time, I would argue vehemently how important it is for everyone to have poetry in their lives, and to feel empowered, to write poetry. That, it's so important to have every voice be able to engage with poetry, if they want to, obviously, and poetry should be in the schools, and everything like that. But yeah, just I think it's just a long-term conversation of what saving means, for myself.
Is the prose giving you an opportunity to get into parts of the conversation, more tragic parts? You've always had humor and tragedy in the same poem, and they work to make a vulnerability for the reader where I think they can accept the ways that you talk about pain. That without that humor it couldn't. But is the prose giving you a different opportunity for that?
Yes, I've been into prose. I think, yeah. Yeah, because I really like how you can't, there's just a lot I really like about prose. just maybe, maybe for myself, I love that I love that you can write prose whenever. Okay, again, I do believe everyone can write a poem, yeah, like at every moment, and you can engage with poetry. But I like that I can sort of engage with prose at any moment and not have to kind of have um, a kind of antagonistic relationship to language, which I've always had with poetry. I know people talk about the muse and waiting for the muse, up in the tower or whatever. And I don't really think of poetry writing that way, but I've always thought of it as a kind of trickster figure that, wanted to engage with, but I can't really control when it happens. And what I love about prose is that you kind of can. I mean, the prose might suck that you write, but it's like you can sit down and like just do this thing, and it's like kind of hard work and really fun. And I love that there's more space. I love that you can, go wild places, and that you can say a lot of thoughts, which it always feels like there's never enough space in a poem to do that, which is why it's a great vehicle for other things, sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely, and I see you doing this a lot. You have the opportunity in prose to make direct relationships to other writers too.
Yes, and kind of just, yeah, like make space for those associations, that are important, or yes, talk about what the inspiration is. And I think sometimes when you write a poem, there's often a frustration. I think maybe, I don't want to say all, but so many poets might feel this way, that they've created something and it's like not a lot of language, and it's they can't always talk about where all those thoughts have come from. And I love that in prose you can, if that, you can sort of look at the generation of a thought and travel it to its nth degree and put things together. And I think that's why it also seems exciting, like prose, just to think about for everyone too. I mean, obviously I don't need to sell prose, but just that, just I love thinking about all the different ways we all associate, variable books and movies and ideas together. And I think that it makes the essay very exciting to me in ways that I never found it before, because I always was always kind of scared of the essay, in kind of academic settings. And I was always sort of told that I was bad at writing essays from teachers and stuff. So it's like exciting that now I can engage with it. Yeah. What do you think? How do you feel? How do you both feel about trying to turn this into poetry versus prose, right? But just, what are your thoughts about it? What does that ring true? Like, like poetry not having enough space. I don't even know what I'm really saying here with the space, because you can have as much space as you want. You can write.
Yeah, you can write a novel in verse. Like,
Yeah.
I wonder, it makes me think of another piece of what you were reading, which is, I wonder how close the magic is to poetry, like how connected to this sort of spirit world we feel, or these visions. It's a conduit to those other worlds, like you were saying, in a way that, I don't know though, I guess the essay can do that too. What do you think?
I think it can. I feel like anything creative can, and that's like the power of creativity. But I do think for so long I felt kind of tapped into the poetry part of it, and it's such an intense flame at this point that like it just like nice to think about myself turning away from it and going to another fire. Yeah, it's just like a really intense flight. Yeah, but I think I love that idea. Yeah, that poetry connects to kind of a spiritual practice, or like a spiritual world or something. But I do think any kind of art does as well. It's not just limited to the poetry, isn't necessarily special in that way. But I think if you do something long enough, then it's like there's a lot of that spirit concentrated on that. And I'd love to kind of spread it out, I guess is what I mean. Take a little fire and put it in the other place.
So what's next? What's your next medium then?
I do want to write yeah, like I have been working on yeah, definitely have like an essay book that I am excited about. But it's not coming out, or I have nothing to announce or something, but I have been but I have been working on it a lot, and I hope it'll get a press soon.
Okay.
Yeah. If anyone's interested, call me. Yeah. Uh, what about you? Oh, sorry.
No, I think we were both gonna say, Miriam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I loved when you were talking about the ghost and just like spirit world in poetry because I haven't heard that much about it. And I was just wondering about like your connection to um just like spiritness in poetry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for that question. I guess that I do feel that uh, I do really feel that all kind of forms of creativity are tied very closely to like a spiritual world. I think creativity and the occult are very close. It's not to say that, you know, if somebody's not engaging in some sort of spiritual practice or they don't believe in a spiritual world that creativity is doesn't exist. I just think that they're so intrinsically tied. I tend to think the occult and creativity and like basic tenets of science are sort of wrapped up in like a big ball of kind of knowledge, and that they're closer, you know, closer cousins than sometimes they get credit for. So because of that, I, I I don't know, I've always been wary. Again, I've mentioned the muse, I mentioned, you know, poetry is a trickster. But I'm sometimes wary of that idea too, because I think threads of that can turn into elitism, and can be saying, if you get this special muse, you're privy to the poetry. If you're not, don't even bother, and don't let's not teach it in the schools because you got to have the, you know, magic crystals or whatever things, you know, people want to say. And I think everyone's capable of engaging with that kind of spirit in that way, and that trickster in that way. But if I were to answer honestly, I do think that, yeah, an engagement with poetry involves a kind of pact with a, you know, a force of some sort. And it's a little bit occult in that it can't be like explained clearly away. And again, I see the occult and science like as being tied very together. So, you know, I'm sure, I'm not saying it's unexplainable at some point, you know, in humanity's future, but I think that, you know, when poets are writing, they tap into something which is outside of a self that they understand, you know, as a person in the world, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm sounding really totally weird.
Do you have a process? Do you have rituals? How do you make it work?
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. I guess that's why I'm loving prose these days, is that I've never really had process or rituals for poetry writing, and I've always been scared to do something like that. Like, gotta have the blue sweater on and, you know, coffee just right or something like that, and then you're gonna get a poem, because I just don't think of poetry writing in that way. I do tend to think of it as something you engage with what as you can in the everyday, and sometimes it gifts you something good, and you can't always you know when that's happening. You might be like, yeah, another throwaway poem, I guess I'll go cook dinner or whatever, and then a few weeks later you might be like, oh, that was the good poem that I got that random day. So it's like very not precious, you know. My process for poetry is not precious. It's like just whenever it happens. But what I love about prose is not so much that I could establish a process, but that I think it's like it's tied to yeah, like a kind of you sit down and words can happen, and they might not be perfect words, but they're more of a, it's more of like a faucet. I feel like it's a faucet you turn on and it's there. And again, I'm not saying it's any good, but you know, it's there and it flows and here we go. And like that to me is more of a process I'm excited about as I am you know, entering middle age or whatever. I don't know, this stage in my life, my knees are not so good. So I like the idea of sitting down, turning on the faucet versus being in this very passionate love affair, you know, with poetry, which I've been since I was a little girl. So that I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, I love that. Do you think that your relationship to your love of poetry changed when you became a mom?
I love that question. It may be in that having to do with time. Because I'm really a firm believer that creativity takes like uninterrupted blocks of time where there's no obligation at all. You know, and you can just sit there and watch videos and not expect anything. Like and I've never gone on like a residency, but I've always thought the concept of a residency is like attractive in that way, that nothing has to happen, but you could, you know, kind of have this time and no one's asking you for anything, and a poem could come out, it could not, but you're like you're working on a poem even if you're not writing one. And I think that, yeah, I think that yeah, the kind of obligation on my time has changed so drastically, especially with, you know, all this stuff happening this year and having, you know, no childcare at all, that kind of stuff like does make that again, that passionate, antagonistic, push pull, exciting love affair with poetry not as attractive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah.
That sounds actually sort of hopeful to me, though, because like a nice, stable relationship with poetry. Like I could.
Well, yes, I know. I get. Do I want? I'm an Aries, so do I want a stable relationship with everybody? I did mention the middle. I'm a middle-aged Aries, so I'm trying to make it work and do something. Yeah, yeah. Prose, it's kind of like a poem. Feels like the right, nice, stable thing. Yeah, to do it.
Okay, fair.
Exactly. It does seem nice. Yeah, right now. A nice stable relationship with poetry feels
Mhm.
interesting. Yeah. No, I don't want it. I don't want that.
No, you're not.
I'm not it. I don't want that. But if somebody does, that's, you know, good. But
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reading and talk. And we'll see you in a few minutes for your workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.